The Honorable West Idahosa, it's good to see you this evening. What do you make of this election and these figures? What do they tell you? You've been a politician, and now perhaps a retired politician, but you know what this means when you win strongly in your home. What do you make of this generally?
Well, what it means is that you have some level of reputation at home, some level of trust by the people that you're in your immediate constituency. And it also means that they believe that you can deliver if given that responsibility. And that's a critical element for any politician that wants to be taken seriously at any other level, because the domestic level is the key parameter for others who are going to consider whether you are reliable. They will be considering whether your people can give a good testimony about you. And so winning home is that testimonial that you require.
Before we discuss partisan aspects of this election, we try to break the legality and some of the analysis of the figures of this election. There is a contention, and I'll come back quickly to you, Honorable West Idahosa, is on the issue of the inconclusiveness of this race. What does the law say about an election being inconclusive?
Well, thank you, Sheung. The first question we must ask is whether this election itself was indeed inconclusive. I am not too sure that this is correct. An inconclusive election is one that cannot be decided on the basis of legal requirements. But I'm not sure that the Osun case is inconclusive. The Kogi State election may have been inconclusive since it had to deal with quite about 91 units, and for many reasons, INEC had to cancel those elections and the results therein. Now, in this case, we are not quite sure whether the cancellation was not only material, and whether or not the cancellation that was effected on this occasion was substantial enough to have affected the result of the election. I am also of the opinion that going by the INEC law itself, section 68 and 69, once the returning officers of the various local governments have incidented the results and they have accepted same, they are bound to release them as it is. The only body that can tamper with those figures will be an election tribunal or a court of law.
Honorable West Idahosa, it seems to be a bit confusing, but just a moment, Mr. Ajijola, you are familiar with INECs Guidelines, which INEC uses in determining some of these situations. We've seen inconclusive election in Bayelsa, in Kogi State, and in some other states. What is INEC riding on when it makes this kind of pronouncement of an inconclusive election?
Thank you very much. So the reason why you have an election that we say is inconclusive is because if certain events occur during the election that deny certain voters the permission or the ability to participate in the process, the implication is that if those voters had voted, there is a possibility that the election result could change. So, for example, in the specific case of Osun governorship election, you have a margin between the APC candidate and the PDP candidate of 353 votes, right, which is very narrow. Both candidates have satisfied 25% in 2/3 of local governments. That's not a problem.
That's the provision of the Constitution.
Yes.
That a candidate that will become a governor must have earned at least 25% of votes in 2/3
of the local governments.
And 2/3 of local governments is 20.
Yes.
So
and
both of them,
yes.
both Adeleke and Oyetola satisfied that requirement.
Yes. Then the next thing is simple majority. So in that case, you would say they give it to the PDP candidate. But because of the issues that occurred, we have 4 local governments, Orulu, Oshogbo, Ife North, Ife Central, and I think Ife South. Now, these 4 local governments experienced some issues which were not really congruent with what we saw in this election, because this was a very peaceful election. And that's why I also think that some of these incidents that happened should be thoroughly investigated. But in any case, we found out in a polling unit, right, a polling official ran away with the polling materials, the ballot papers. And in that is in Oshogbo, and 884 people could not vote because of that. Now, even
or they voted, but they carried the ballot away.
No, there was the one of the car reader,
okay,
and the EC8A, right? But in the case of here, a polling officer went off with papers, and those ballot papers, as you know, without it, you cannot vote. And 884 people were registered in that polling unit. You see it? And even at the strength of that 884, in theory, if those 884 people were given the opportunity to vote, let us assume that the 884 people decided to vote for the APC candidate. In theory, what it means is that the APC candidate would come out with a higher score than the PDP candidate. Now, you have a total of, according to what INEC has released, of 3,498. Although, when we had what was released by Orolu local government coalition officer, he gave us, 1,664 for Ward 8 and 2,252 for Ward 9. But but what has been released for now is 3,498 as the total number of polling units affected. So, in 6 wards, 7 polling units. So the summary of it is that these 3,498 people, in theory, if they are allowed to vote, right, there's a possibility they can vote in such a way as to provide an opportunity, because now the PDP candidate is leading. But in theory, they can vote in such a way that they might vote more for the APC candidate and then eventually win. So and that is why INEC at this point cannot declare a winner until those 3,498 people have been given the opportunity to vote. And just last quick, in this election, it's not like the other inconclusive elections, that once you already get to this point, you can say it's a done deal. This is very different, because even at a 50% voter turnout of 3,498, it's about 1,750, which is realistic to come out for the election on Thursday, minimum. Now, if 1,750 come out, for example, and the margin is 353, anything can happen. So this is a really serious case.
Interesting. You are the lawyer here, Honorable West Idahosa, and let me read a portion of the Electoral Act as amended 2010, Section 69, under the Declaration of Result. It says, and I read, in an election to the office of the President or Governor, whether or not contested, and in any contested election to any other elective office, the result shall be ascertained by the counting the votes cast for each candidate and subject to the provisions of sections 133, 134, and 179 of the Constitution. The candidate that receives the highest number of votes shall be declared elected by the appropriate returning officer. Your argument tonight is that the guideline of 2015 of INEC is against the provision of the Constitution. Can you explain to us what you mean?
Yeah, now what I mean is that INEC cannot make guidelines that will be contrary to the declaratory method provided by the supreme law of the land. For example, the section 68, which you've just read, is very clear. It means that once results are properly entered, the duty of INEC is to collect these results and declare a winner. Now the question is, if INEC claims that they are making some guidelines, and one of the guidelines is that, where the council votes or the elections, areas where elections are not conducted, where the total votes that would have resulted from these areas are far in excess of the difference between a winner and a loser, then of course there should be a runoff. Now my argument is that when you cancel votes, ideally, the cancellation is part of the electoral process. You have the powers under the law to do such cancellation. The cancellation remains valid and can no longer be part of the electoral process. Now, this was made very clear in Osun versus Shomole by the Supreme Court. You will remember that in that case, the question was cancelled votes. Where cancelled votes were ascribed to a particular candidate, the other candidate went to court, challenged it, and the court made a clear pronouncement that once votes are cancelled, they are cancelled. They can no longer be factored in the election decision process. So the question is, why are we talking about cancelled votes when the body that cancelled the votes have the law, the lawful authority to do so? I think they should go then to the rest of the votes and declare a winner, all the top 2 candidates having met the requirements of the law. That's my argument.